Welcome back to Everything Marketplaces, where we talk with founders and leaders from some of today's top marketplaces. So this is episode 173, which is a really great group chat that we just had with Reham Fagiri, who's a co-founder and CEO of AptDeco. AptDeco is one of the largest marketplaces for buying and selling used furniture. They've been featured on A16Z's Marketplace 100 list as a top 100 marketplace the past few years, and have also raised over 19 million from top investors like Initialized Capital. So this is a great chat with Reham, where we went back to the founding story and first steps to starting AptDeco in 2014, their experience going through YC, some of the early challenges they faced, how it's evolved and scaled to become one of the largest marketplaces for buying and selling used furniture. Reham shared what the fundraising journey has been like, tips for early stage founders, and we also had a great group Q&A. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm going to find it a great watch to the end. So Reham, as I mentioned briefly right before we started recording, I've been following AptDeco for a while now. It's been mentioned a few times in the community more recently. So it's great to have you join us here today for the group chat, and want to start off with saying a huge thanks for taking the time to do so in advance. So we have a lot that we're going to dive into with all of your experience starting and scaling AptDeco. But before we do, I think it might be great if you can start off by briefly sharing your background for those that might not know you.
Sure, yeah. Nice to meet you guys. So I'm Reham, co-founder and CEO of AptDeco. My background, I'm an engineer. Did electrical engineering in undergrad, and worked in finance, but building software in finance at Goldman Sachs for like 6 years or so. Then went to business school, and so actually the idea for AptDeco came straight out of my experience trying to sell my furniture when I was leaving business school.
Yeah, it's a really cool background. Thanks for sharing with us on that. So I did want to go back to, the founding story. You kind of briefly mentioned it, selling furniture yourself. But could you maybe just share more about, that founding story and what the first steps were that you took to actually start AppDeco at the time?
Sure. I was trying to sell my furniture on Craigslist to move back to New York actually for a job that was waiting for me at another startup. And yeah, I don't know if everyone here has used Craigslist or like, now also Facebook Marketplace is pretty big, but I was everything from like everything because I was moving from Philly to New York. I was just trying to get rid of everything and kind of start new. And so I listed everything on Craigslist, and people were showing up and some people were not showing up, and it was just like very awkward with everybody, strangers in my apartment. And so for me, I actually had this moment where I felt very unsafe also in my own space. I had this gentleman come to my apartment, and he was kind of getting angry, and I just didn't understand why. And I'm just like, wow, this is crazy. Like, why are we doing this? There has to be a better way to do this. Like, and safety first, especially as a single female at the time. And I was also, like I started obsessing over it, but also I was in business school, and a lot of my classmates were also asking similar questions, like, what are you going to do with your furniture? So most people from Philly end up moving out of Philly after business school. And so everybody was talking about it during like the time of graduation. So I had this like very personal experience. And then I saw everybody was kind of complaining about it. And that was like the first aha moment. But what ended up happening was my now co-founder, then friend, and also my co-founder is also my husband now as well. He was in New York trying to sell his sofa, also on Craigslist, for no safety reasons. Like it wasn't a safety issue for him, but he was trying to sell it, and people were just not showing up, or like they were lowballing him. And for him, that was like a very frustrating. So I was moving from New York, and I had a U-Haul with whatever left that I couldn't sell. And so he asked me that day, he's like, can I just borrow your U-Haul for one day? And he relisted his stuff on like his sofa on Craigslist with one day only, free delivery. And I kid you not, immediately someone showed up, paid full price, did not negotiate, and he helped them just like lug it to whatever they were going. And that was like the aha moment. So for us from the beginning, we're like, if you build a trusted community, if you have pickup and delivery, if you bring payments online, and you know, there's no reason why it shouldn't work. And so Airbnb and Uber and all these companies had already taken off at the time. So like it felt like furniture is the next frontier.
Definitely such a big need for it. And sounds like delivery was kind of key in the very beginning as well.
Absolutely, for sure.
Yeah, so marketplaces, notably face the, chicken and the egg or the kind of cold start problem in starting out. So how did you solve for this, with AptDeco and kind of get your, first listings on board with furniture and help drive those, initial demand and first sales?
So the very first things we did was actually go on Craigslist. You'll kind of hear the theme a lot. I spent a lot of time on Craigslist. So we actually even before I even started to like I came up with the idea, but didn't start it right away. So I validated the idea by, like, okay, our hypothesis was, and I'm going to answer your question, Mike, but our hypothesis was like um, if you add delivery, it should work. So we started testing on Craigslist, like adding listings with the title with delivery, without delivery, just to see the demand and how people are responsive. And we saw there was like a very different type of response when we added delivery. So that was like the first, like, okay, like I think this would work. So once we like built the MVP and launched it, we went back on Craigslist and we just started emailing people like, hey, there's this site that we just launched, like, give it a try. And then some people actually did it, which was like for me surprising. But then when we went through YC, which was it was kind of a big unlock for us when we went through YC. We were telling them how we were getting supply. And then, but 1 out of 10 of those people that we would email actually would respond. The partners at YC were like, well, what do you do with the other 90% that just don't take action? And so their suggestion was like, well, and we're like nothing. And said like, well, just copy their listings and put it on AptDeco and just like get the supply, build the supply that way initially. Essentially, like to some extent, you have to fake it till you make it. And so that was the beginning of that. The rest of history.
Yeah, no, that's a really cool. And then what about the demand side? Because, demand's usually the hard side for, marketplaces to kind of solve in the very beginning.
We did a couple of things. One, we actually like relisted those pieces to again with on Craigslist and said with delivery. This is a long time ago before like Craigslist now has a lot more checks and balances. So like we were able to hack it for a long time, but now I don't think we can hack it anymore. And so that was the beginning. But then we also started doing like like kind of guerrilla marketing. We created some flyers and things of that nature to just like get the word out there.
Yeah. And one of the topics I wanted to talk about too, as well, is constraining and marketplaces that are local in nature typically constrained to one kind of market to essentially kind of get those first kind of transactions going and the flywheel spinning. So did you initially constrain?
Yeah, so we were a New York company for a very long time. So we were very constrained and actually really focused in Manhattan and Brooklyn initially. Just, just had a hunch on supply, like where the good supply is coming, quote unquote, good supply, like mass market, branded supply, and then expanded from there.
Yeah, so I'd be curious to learn a little bit more about that. So what all goes into I guess like launching and expanding into a new market?
So we've definitely learned through the along the way. We've had a few false starts as well. So um, I think it's the key to be ready to launch in another market. You first need to understand like the supply and demand. Like, what are your key drivers for supply and demand? Do you have a diversified set of channels that you can, use and replicate? Because also not everything is going to work. Like if you only have 1 or 2 acquisition channels that work for you in one market, that means you're not ready actually to move to another market. Like you need to have, 4 to 5 diversified channels that consistently, okay, if I invest X, whether it's dollars or time, my return will be Y. We tried to launch in DC actually, maybe 3 years after we launched. And we thought we had our diversified channels at the time and quickly, launched and with kind of the same theory and, tried to hack Craigslist and did all these things. So we got the listings, but we couldn't get the demand. So first, make sure you have your diversified set of acquisition channels. To understand the market dynamics, right? Like even when you're deciding which market to go to, what are those, what's your criteria as far as like launching in the market? And we've refined that over time. So we looked at our data, we've looked at our, what are the commonalities from our customers who use us? And then we tried to look at like demographic and, income data, for example, in other markets and also logistics data to launch.
No, I know that's going to lead to quite a few questions when we get to that group Q&A. And I wanted to discuss some of the specific topics that you mentioned. But I guess for a little bit of context, could you give us a brief overview of AptDeco today as a marketplace?
Sure. So AptDeco today is the leading furniture resale platform for buying and selling furniture. We handle everything from pickup and delivery and payments and everything. So in certain markets, we actually run the logistics ourselves. So we have our own teams and trucks, and we've built a lot of software to enable pickup and delivery without warehousing. So we actually never warehouse. Everything is matched through our software for same day pickup and delivery. In some markets, we actually do outsource some of the logistics, but we're powering with also with our own software too, logistics software too. And yeah, and so we're national as well. So we launched in New York City in 2010, not 2010, excuse me, in 2014. Um, and we kind of were in New York for like New York and kind of started expanding New York City, then like the suburbs and Connecticut and New Jersey. And then in 2021, we went to Philly, and beginning of 2023, we launched nationally.
Very cool. And yeah, so we've briefly kind of mentioned, the earlier stages and some of the earlier kind of challenges, and then, an overview of AppDeco today. But, I'd be very curious to learn a little bit more about, the kind of pickup and delivery. And, as far as, is this something that you essentially kind of build out in each market, or is it something that you potentially kind of partner with in, certain markets?
Yes, yes, and for both. So we in certain markets we do it ourselves. So like we build it out from scratch. And so in other markets we're outsourcing it, but then bring it in-house when it makes sense. So I think even with like logistics, and while we're an asset light business where because we don't warehouse, like there is still a physical component of what we do. So when we launched in the Bay Area, we invested in a couple of trucks and a small space just to store things there in transit. And by small, like I literally mean like maybe like 1,000 square feet, like very, very small, like smaller than anybody's apartment. And then we just saw like we thought demand will come right away, but it took a bit of time. So then like we're just not utilizing our fixed assets to the highest extent. And that was a good learning for us around like getting to a certain scale before investing in physical property. And so what we've done since then is we've launched nationally and we're using third-party shippers to do the logistics for us. And when we get to a certain scale, then we're able to like bring our own logistics in certain markets when we feel like it's needed.
Yeah, that's always something that we're kind of discussing in the community is kind of taking on that, that more kind of value chain and kind of value add there, and then kind of weighing that those kind of additional costs there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's there's definitely pros and cons, and it's you have to figure, you kind of to some extent you gotta iterate, and so like even with time things change, and you know new entrants come who may help you kind of evolve your business model.
Yeah. And speaking of, kind of evolving, sometimes marketplaces, especially in consumer, tend to start to kind of professionalize, one or kind of both sides. And so, like on the supply side, is that something you've seen maybe with like, just more kind of consumers kind of moving into power sellers or resellers, maybe?
Yes, absolutely. So now we close to 35% of our business actually is on the power seller side, which are retail brands. These are furniture brands that we are now powering resell on their behalf. So, and that started off actually by us looking at our data. So when probably 2018, 2019 timeframe, we saw really strong growth, and we were just thinking about, well, marketplaces are expensive. You gotta acquire a buyer and a seller to make a transaction. And you know, without endless amount of money, like what are the other levers that we can take advantage of? And so we looked at our data and we saw around 60, 70% of our sales actually come from like 15 or so brands, furniture brands. And so that was a big aha moment. We're like, well, we saw that they sell faster, they sell for a lower discount rate. And this so essentially they're much more valuable. Like people love them, and you can actually earn more. And so for us, there was a big question on like, well, how do we find every person who owns like a West Elm, or believe it or not, even IKEA, like IKEA or Crate and Barrel or CB2. Um, And we realized that's of course a tall order to try to figure out who these people are who own these products. And so we had a hunch that we could maybe talk to these brands directly, and convince them to work with us. And so that's what we did. We started knocking on doors a lot of brands, and we signed up. Like now we work with over 30 brands, and including like West Elm and Pottery Barn and Article, Lazy Boy, and Book Constant and Caligaris. And so we power their resale. Some of them we are, instead of going in an outlet store, you'll find their products on AptDeco. Some of them we're actually selling directly from their distribution centers. Some of them we're handling their return. So we've also evolved our business model because we've built a technology that actually now we can apply to different use cases as well. So it has evolved, but it's the power seller is the name of the game for sure.
Yeah, certainly. So that's really cool to hear about. And I guess on the demand side, have you kind of moved maybe potentially, up market on the demand as well? Or
So the demand for us actually stayed consistent. Like a big portion of our, we don't have power buyers per se. We've tested different iterations, like for example, staging. We've tested design, like interior designers, and we do have some interior designers who are definitely power buyers, but we haven't been able to scale it in the same way we've been able to scale supply. That being said, is because we've always been very supply constrained. So I think with every marketplace is different. Some marketplaces are supply constrained and some are demand constrained. We've always been supply constrained. So when we get the right quality listings, um, uh, at scale, we see more sales because over 60% of our sales actually come from organic channels, like unpaid channels. So for us, it's just like that's why the focus has always been on like let's get good quality supply and the demand will follow.
certainly. So one of the things I want to talk about too is growth, and I believe you've been listed on the A16Z's Marketplace 100 for a few years. So could you maybe share more about what growth has been like?
I mean, the space is very tricky, just to say the least. We've also just had many competitors come and go. They've tackled it differently. But for us, growth has been, we've focused on unit economics. We've focused on building a business that's, foundationally solid and built to last. And so we intentionally did not go the just grow at all cost. So that being said, we have been growing, triple digits percentage wise, the first like 4 or 5 years. And then over the last few years, we've been focused on profitability. And, we actually just reached EBITDA profitability, about to be cash flow positive. So our growth has been also kind of focused on making sure like we're focusing on our bottom line. The exciting thing for us is when we started in 2014, sustainability was big, but not as big as it is today. When we started in 2014, brands didn't really think about resale as an option. And for us now, 10 years in, we see this really big opportunity. We sit in the middle, like, and so we've even our businesses like now the way we talk about our marketplaces, we are an operating system for furniture resale. We've built a full end-to-end suite of technology and logistics to power resale for any big and bulky type of retailers. And we see that as a big driver for growth for us in the future as well.
Yeah, so could you maybe share a little bit more about that as far as like the end-to-end kind of tooling?
Sure, yeah. So, we have the traditional marketplace where you can go on and buy and sell. We've built the software and logistics, so same day pickup and delivery, the scheduling of matching people. There's a lot of like algorithms that we've built, based on a lot of data that we have over the years. And what we've been able to see is, brands now want to be part of resale, right? So just to put in perspective, the furniture resale market, when we launched in 2014, it was around $8 billion. Now it's actually projected to be 58 billion by the end of 2027. Huge growth, huge growth, and it's serious revenue that these brands are missing out on, right? And so actually what happened was one of our brand partners came to us and asked us, hey, could you build us like a custom made resale marketplace? And you guys just take care of it. And we're like, oh, interesting. Sure, we can do that, and then try to figure out what that looks like. So, it just made sense for us to handle that. And same thing with logistics. So it's a really full end-to-end platform. It's our marketplace, it's our logistics, it's our customer service, it's the entire logistics that we've created and built at a local level, but also a national level, is what we're able to now apply for other solutions.
And you mentioned data a few times. So, and sounds like you're very data driven. So I guess, if we just kind of like go back to the earlier stages, I guess like, when did you really start to kind of like look at data and, use that to make more informed decisions?
Yeah, we've always looked at data, but I I can't remember the exact timeline, but when we invested, and I know there's probably other tools that exist now, but we're still using Looker. We invested in Looker, which for us was a very expensive investment at the time. So we've always been data driven. Like I come from a data background, my co-founder does as well. And we just, we're able just to see trends. And so like this is how we uncover like the relationship with certain brands and like the product turnover for certain products and the time to sell, like not everything is created equal, and like really kind of honing on that. Same thing with marketing data. It's really important. I highly recommend, I not necessarily you have to invest in Looker, but just investing in like the data and focusing on like understanding what are those levers that you can leverage to help grow your supply or demand as needed.
It's definitely something we're always discussing here. And you mentioned pricing earlier, and we've had like entire conversations kind of diving into that, and how marketplaces can use it as a lever. So,
oh yes, for sure. Like even with our like pricing as comes to transaction fees, for example, and we've played with that a lot. We changed it a lot. We run a lot of experiments, like A/B testing experiments, to understand like what are those levers, like how do people actually care about like fees, sellers, for example? And we started, I think, at 15%, and now like our fee ranges from 15 all the way to 60%, believe it or not. But we saw that like, we ran a lot of experiments, and we saw that, there's certain price points that people don't care about. There's like motivation is different. And so we're able to just make these tweaks over time.
Yeah, I'm sure you not only had the kind of transaction fee there, but also the delivery fee as well. So are
Yes.
there maybe like kind of interesting learnings around that?
Yeah, so the reason why we brought delivery in-house is actually to be able to pass down the cost savings to customers. Because what we learned is the cheaper the shipping, the higher the sell-through. And so, when we first launched the company, we actually didn't have delivery in-house. We used moving companies in New York City and kind of optimize within like their free availability. Think of like an Uber type of model. That's what we tried to do. While it worked in the beginning, it's just the quality of service is not there. So anytime they didn't show up or there was an issue, we were still getting blamed as AptDeco, although we had nothing to do with it. But also the costs were just too high. Like the shipping costs for the customer were too high. But out of desperation, one day they canceled all our jobs last minute, and we had everything scheduled. And so we just we went and got a zip van and found a couple of guys on Craigslist and did delivery that way. And we had people call us, say, wow, this is the best delivery experience ever. That was the aha moment around that, like the beginning time period. And what we then learned is, yeah, we can actually save a lot of money for the customer by doing it ourselves.
And I can also imagine too that there's probably like a higher willingness to pay for that service, say for instance in like New York maybe versus kind of other areas, I would imagine.
Yes, it is. And actually it's makes taking things off platform harder. Because this is a big question for, I think people get a lot as far as marketplaces, like how do you protect about by taking things off platform by offering this end-to-end, system. And like, even when sellers try to take things off platform, buyers are like, well, I don't have a way to deliver it. AptDeco is way cheaper for me than like hiring a man in a van, or even like, there's a new startups that are doing this like a Lug or a Dolly. It's not a revenue driver. We do make some margin from it, but that's not the primary way we make money.
No, I'm glad you mentioned disintermediation because that's something that we're
Yes.
we're always discussing here. So yeah, so I guess it's worth noting, through all this, it sounds like what we kind of dive into things that AptDeco is a more operationally intense marketplace, and kind of from the outside looking in. So I guess are there any maybe kind of I would say like kind of key learnings from running it as a more operationally complex marketplace, and maybe even tips for earlier stage founders that are looking to build them?
If you asked me 10 years ago, would I be running a logistics company? I would have been like, you're crazy. But it actually is our competitive moat at the end of the day. My advice is, follow the data, follow what your customers are asking for, and build for that. So what we learned, like the data says, like the only way you can do this successfully is actually by doing it yourselves. And so uh, the second advice I would say is just be disciplined if you do have like a more operationally intensive business. Data is the key there, right? And customer experience. Be obsessed with your customer experience. Talk to your customers, learn from them, hear what they're saying, and iterate.
Those are going to be a really helpful tips. So we're going to get into the group Q&A here. Otherwise, you and I could just go on talking for quite some time here. And I promise that founders they could come on. But one of the topics that I wanted to discuss right before we do is fundraising. And you've raised from some pretty awesome investors, such as Initialized Capital. So what has the fundraising journey been like?
We've raised 19 million to date. And it's like we're like an A plus B minus, like a series A plus, a little bit under a B. But compared to our competitors, we've raised a lot less than them, and they've actually all now shut down. So like fundraising does not mean success. This is like if that's the one thing you can take away is that like you raising a lot of money does not mean you're actually gonna be successful because we are a testament to if you focus on building a strong, foundationally sound business, you can outperform, outlast, and outsmart your competitors. And like I'm a living and breathing example of that. Our journey started through YC. And that was the first, like we bootstrapped initially, my co-founder and I, and we the first outside capital came from YC. We actually had a competitor in the same batch as us in YC that ended up raising 20x what we raised at YC. So 20x, just like, kid you not. And so so we were dealing with that, oh, what about them? They've raised all this money. Like, what about you? Although like our performance was actually even comparable or maybe even a little bit better than them. So like it's just like for us, that was just part of the journey. And we just continue to focus on our business. We've broken a lot of barriers. I was the first Black female to go through YC ever. And so for us, like that was, we just had to just do what's right for the business and just focus on the things that we control. So fundraising, there's like just a lot of side factors that, you can control. Anyway, a couple of years later, just to tell you the story, is they ended up shutting down. And that continues to happen. So we've had 4 or 5 competitors over the years have come and are now all gone, who've raised a lot more money than us. Nobody's tackled it the way we're doing it, which is peer-to-peer without warehousing. Everybody else has tried to warehouse products. So for us, yeah, like it's been an interesting journey, but it's also made us a lot stronger.
I want to say that, hats off to you because you definitely, it's been quite the journey. And yeah, you mentioned as far as, a few competitors along the way as well. That's actually one of the, one of the things I want to talk about at some point was just like the competitive nature of marketplaces, right? And just kind of, for 10 plus years, just seeing the different kind of, I would say, competitors kind of surface and other strategies that they might, or approaches that they might take as well. So.
Focus on what you control. That's all I would say about competition. Focus on what you can control. Competition is a good validator, right? Because that means you have a real business, and even if they raise money, that's totally fine. But like, don't get distracted. Don't focus on the noise. Focus on the things you control, like which is building a good quality product that people love and come back to, and and the rest will fall into place.
Awesome. Well, to make a highlight clip for that and share it in the community for founders. Hey, Dimitri, do you want to come on?
Thanks, Mike. I would love to hear about your journey with experimentation as someone that came from a scientific background. How did you get started and when did that happen in your kind of growth? what did your first like few tests look like? What were you testing? How was the randomization set up? And kind of maybe where are you now? So sorry
Yeah,
for a barrage of questions.
no, that's awesome. Yeah, we started, um, I think very early on, if I remember correctly, like, and it probably actually started with us testing our fees, because we were just trying to figure out like how to just make more money, frankly. And so, but I just didn't want to just change the fees without understanding the impact. And so just it's also coming from like a technical background. Like I knew that it's important, the value of testing. We This is dating me, but if you guys are familiar with Optimizely, they had at the time you could use it as a small company, a very small company. Now they're only focused on like enterprise, very, very expensive. We've been out like now we can't afford Optimizely because I think like they're dealing with like really large corporations. And I think yeah, we started with like testing our fees and we started testing like, just even simple things like copy on the site. We tested even checkout flows, like different flows, just to understand like how people react. And then when Optimizely decided to change their pricing structure, we kind of were like left in a void because we didn't know what to do for a while. So we stopped doing testing. Then we just we built our own tooling for some time, and we've been able to just continue experimenting. We still do. I would say that like we probably can do more testing than we actually do, but it's just there's a level of, don't do testing for a lot just for the sake of testing. Like you have to decide when it makes sense. Like if it's, you know, when it makes sense for your business, is it worth the time? Because of course it takes time. Like if it's something that's intuition, like listen, like this is just like a no-brainer, do it. But I'll give you an example. We launched this feature called Make an Offer, which I think, I'm sure people understand, right? It's intuitively, it makes so much sense. And I still am upset that it hasn't worked. The kind of like the headline is it didn't end up working at the end. We launched it without actually, we built the feature. So this is a lesson of what not to do. We built the feature because it made intuitive sense. Like most marketplaces have it. And we launched it and we just saw our conversion rate go down. And it's not because the feature was buggy, it's a great feature. But what we saw was like is essentially increasing the time to make a sale. So, and so then we ran an experiment where we did an A/B test where we showed the button to some people and we didn't show it to other people. That's probably where we should start. We should have started, right? Instead of building the full feature. And we like the data was undeniable. Not having the button improved our conversion rate. We spent a whole year optimizing that feature and ended up just having to pull a plug. So very painful, a very painful story, but it's just the power of data, right? And so you kind of like it's sunk cost at the end and just do what's right based on the data.
Hey, Olivia, do you want to come on?
Yeah, for sure. I had a question. You mentioned a few times that you went through YC and you were kind of, early in the batch. So I was curious to hear your take on, as going through YC as a marketplace, because, would love to kind of get your insights on how that process was as a marketplace when, maybe it might be a little bit more challenging to get traction or to get started. So would love your advice for, early stage founders that might be thinking about an accelerator.
Yeah, YC was great. I'm still in touch with a lot of the folks there. And it's an incredible community. And so for us, when we went through YC, I wouldn't have thought on my own, the story I told in the beginning of like just copying these listings from Craigslist, like, it just really helps because they see so many companies and, they've tried, like they give us the advice of like, oh, this is where, because they had, front seat access to Airbnb's growth and all of that. So they've like, well, you should try X, Y, and Z. Work for Airbnb. But not everything is going to work, right? So like, for example, they had, one of the partners suggested, oh, like you should consider taking photos of and like, trying to offer that. And we did. It didn't work for us like how it worked. Like I know Airbnb had this iconic story about like the founders going and taking photos, which we did too, but it didn't yield the same results. But just to answer your question more succinctly, like, yes, what I think accelerators are a really good way, one community wise, we would have these group chats every 2 weeks. And, and we're all sitting at a table, sitting around the room, and everybody was talking about their challenges. And then, you have the partners facilitating it. But what ends up coming out of it is like we'll realize that we're all having very similar, while our businesses are different, but they're very similar experiences, even though some of our marketplaces, some of them are enterprise, some of them are maybe consumer goods, whatever it is. So I think just generally speaking, building that community, and I think like hats to you, Mike, for creating the marketplace community. I wish that existed, 10 years ago. It would have been amazing. And I think for marketplaces, like the more you can be engaged, the more you can talk to people who have done it before and see what worked for others and like trying to figure out how to make it work for yourself.
Great question. Also, too, example as far as the pictures working for Airbnb and not for AptDeco.
Yeah, and like the thing I didn't even touch on is it's kind of part of the funny part of when we copied the listings, which I think Reddit did. Reddit used to just copy and like they fake their all the initial posts, right? So it was like Alexis and his co-founders who were just like posting everything with like and so we did a version of that, right? But we had a physical product that we need to figure out to get to point A to point B. And so when we listed it, the first day somebody bought something, but it wasn't ours. The sellers didn't know that it was, it was on AptDeco. So we had to figure out how do we get this product from these two strangers that, and we're in the middle. We actually ended up like first I emailed them like, hey, I'm the founder of AptDeco. We covered your listing and we would love to buy it from you. Of course, they thought I was a scammer. And so they did not respond as they should have, because of course, we all know about the scams on sites like Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace. So then our next iteration, we were like, oh my God, what are we going to do? How are we going to get this piece of furniture to this person who bought it? So we just reached out to them as a normal person, like, hey, like I would love to buy, I think it was a headboard. I would love to buy this headboard. Is it available? Yes, they responded right away. I just reached out on Craigslist as like some pseudo name. They said yes, and I'm like, great. And I went there and I'm like, great, this is amazing. Here's some cash. Can I just send a delivery, like a moving company to pick it up? They're like, great. And so then I'm like, wow, this actually works out very well. And so then we started iterating from there and we created a whole process. And then we started like promoting AptDeco and we go to these people's homes. So like, the foundationally, like they kind of gave us the blueprint of like, just sure, you should like try to talk to customers and do these things, but you still have to figure out how to do it and how to make it and apply it to your own use case.
Thanks. Hey, Shigen, do you want to come on?
Hi, quick question. You've talked a lot about the early days. I guess as someone who specializes on data, how are you looking at data today in your marketplace? And then if you have any plans for AI, that term that everyone brings up in your roadmap.
Oh yeah, we look at data very closely today. They know not to come to me without having like a whole data story, right? And I'm not just saying like just do analysis for the sake of analysis, but like it's just like, well, like what does the data say? Like, what does it tell us? And like let's use make an informed decision based on that. Yeah, so it's very, very integral to everything we do. And that's why we've been able to build like a really healthy business, a healthy, fundamentally sound business where unit economics make sense and customer acquisition is affordable. All those things is rooted on that. As far as your next question around AI, it's actually stuff we're working on right now. We're launching like a whole curation experience using AI. But we're not just building for the sake of building. I think it's like we're trying to figure out like what tools can we leverage that already exist that will just make the experience less friction, create less friction for our customers and our, whether it's a business customer or a retail customer. There's a lot of stuff that we're looking at in the logistics side that we are building ourselves. So some stuff we're taking off the shelf that will just help. Some stuff we're building ourselves for our logistics, routing models and things of that nature.
Awesome. Glad you mentioned AI. So had that on my notes. Founder wanted me to ask about that. Well, cool. So we're almost out of time here, but thanks so much for taking the time to join us here. This is such a fun chat, and go back to the very beginning and hear about how AptDeco has evolved, and a huge congrats on your journey and kind of where you're at today. So we're all pulling for you. It's really awesome to see what you've built with it as a marketplace. And actually, I had one last question before we you kind of wrap things up. And that's if you could go right back to before you started AptDeco, what would you tell yourself about marketplaces?
Ooh, marketplaces are hard. They're they're hard, trying to get, two customers to make one transaction. But once you figure it out, they're a lot of fun. And you can like really, see it flourish. So just, so I think like just coming with that understanding and just like the chicken and egg is real, and just having an open mind around like, trying different things and see what works. Just because it worked for us, it may not work for you. But just like, I think it's just important to have that perspective of just like quick testing, lots of iteration, and see power sellers or power customers, whether it's your supply constraint or demand constraint, is key. Like if you look at eBay or Airbnb or any of these larger companies at this stage, they all have a power customer. Figure out who your power customer is. And so for us, I'll just end with this. Like we thought our power customer would be interior designers and real estate agents because it's like common sense, right? Like these people or moving companies or what have you, right? We tried all that in the beginning and none of it worked. Like it's just it wasn't aligned. But we just didn't give up. We just kept trying. Like there has to be, based on our data, like there has to be some sort of a power player here, and then we eventually landed on it. Just keep trying.
Awesome. That's going to be a great parting advice for us. And then last but not least, time for a quick plug. Where can we keep up with you at?
You can follow me on LinkedIn. And that's where I post on our journey or like follow our company. Also at AptDeco on Instagram.
Well, thanks again for joining us here for the group chat. And thanks everyone for the questions today.